Hi, good morning. Welcome to our April session with Susanne Harrison from Robertson Associates. Today we're talking about knowing your numbers, and I know for a lot of us it's something we bury our head in the sand and we don't really want to go to accountants, and not all of us are au fait with the Excel spreadsheets. But I'm delighted that Susanne is actually here to assure us and actually put us back in the road of confidence again to knowing our numbers. So I'd like to welcome Susanne Harrison today as our speaker.
Hi there. I have to confess that although I work in a chartered accountants, I am not an accountant. And in some respects, that's a benefit because it means that when it comes to spreadsheets, when it comes to conversations about the numbers, I pride myself in trying to make it as simple as possible and as straightforward as possible, because it's absolutely crucial that every business owner gets their head around their numbers, and it doesn't have to be a challenge. And no question is too silly when it comes to your business numbers, that's for sure. I spent the first year in the business with my husband and business partner asking him questions constantly about what's this and what's that. So no question is too silly, that's for definite. Okie doke. Shall I just get started?
We're delighted. I'm looking forward to it because I'll probably learn a lot from this session today as well, Susanne. So over to you.
Good stuff. Okay. Right, just check that the screen share is up and working and we can get going. Okay, so we have a number of presentations around knowing your numbers. We can go through the details of each of the components of business numbers, but today I thought I would start with one of the most important, and that is how to transform your profits through price. So what I was going to start with is a little warm-up experiment. Now, in normal times, when we were doing this, when everybody's present, we would use the chat box. But I would ask you, if you have a pen and a piece of paper, if you could take a moment to go and get a pen and a piece of paper, and I'm going to ask you 4 questions about some pictures.
I'm participating.
Sorry?
I'm participating.
Oh, good stuff, lovely. There are no trick questions, okay? So these questions, just answer as best you can. There is no right answer, and as I said, there are no trick questions. Okay, so the first one is, this is a picture of an Airedale Terrier, and my question is, in centimetres, how tall do you think an average Airedale Terrier is? And that's the first question.
Okay.
The second question is, this is a Jack Russell. And the question is, how tall do you think the average Jack Russell is in centimetres? Okay. The third question is, which dog do you think is the largest or the biggest? And the fourth question is, I have just asked you 3 questions. Which of the 3 questions was the easiest to answer?
Okay.
Okay. Now then, ordinarily I would run through the chat box, but I just wanted to share with you that ordinarily the answer to the third question, the answer to the last question, which question was the easiest to answer, most people say it was which is the biggest or which is the largest. And actually, when it comes to measuring the height of something in centimetres, that can be quite challenging to do. So a Jack Russell is usually between 25 and 38 centimetres tall, and an Airedale Terrier is usually between 56 and 61 centimetres. So well done if you were within that range. But actually, the point of the question is that most people find the question, which is the largest or which is the biggest, easiest to answer. Okay. Now, I would do the same with some oranges and weight, but we can't fit all of that in. But the next one I'm going to ask you is a question about how much the next 2 items are. Okay. So the first one is, how much do you think the cross pen is? That's item A. Okay. And then the next question is, how much do you think the Bic pen is? And then the third question, which pen do you think is the most expensive? Okay. And then the fourth question is, which question was the easiest to answer? The first, the second, or the third? The third one was, which is most expensive? And in most instances, the question that was easiest to answer is the one around most expensive. Okay. So these two exercises show that what we find easier as people, as humans, is we find it easier to compare. Yeah. We find it easier to know which is biggest, which is smallest, which is the most expensive, or which is the cheapest. Okay. And the research behind this has found that as humans, we rarely know the absolute value of anything. And that's the value in centimeters, in kilograms, in pounds and pence. Okay. We rarely know the absolute value of anything without some assistance, like using a ruler or like using weighing scales, but we can compare things well. Okay. So from an early age, we learn to know which is biggest, which is smallest, which is tallest, which is shortest, which is heaviest, which is lightest. And that applies and extends into which is the most expensive, which is the cheapest. And we learn by the cues in the things that we have around us to make that comparison. Okay, and it applies to price. Okay, so please remember that we compare things well, and this will lead me on to the sometimes controversial point that if you have one price, this can often be the wrong price. Okay, so if you do one thing, be it bookkeeping, be it consultancy, be it I'm trying to think of something else, be it a painter and decorator, and you have one price and you charge by the hour, I would challenge you that that's possibly the wrong price. And the reason for that is you could be leaving money on the table because different customers value things in different ways, and we need to give them choice to allow them to compare what you offer. Okay, so the first tip when it comes to price is to offer customers choice to compare what you're offering rather than comparing you to someone else. Okay, so please remember that your customers are always comparing, and if they're not comparing what you offer, they're comparing what you offer to what somebody else offers, and they'll often be doing that on price. Okay, so think about how you could offer customers choice to compare what you offer, be that a range or be that different levels of service. And we'll come back to this again later, but that's just a warm-up exercise to get you into the psychology of numbers and the importance of price when it comes to your business. Okay. So we'll move on now to the drivers of profit, and this is where we start to get into the numbers a little bit more. So what drives profit in your business and in any business? We like to think about there being 9 drivers of profit in any business. Okay, and we'll go through each of these in turn. So there we go. Okay, now they're color coded because they relate to sales, costs, systems and efficiency, and price. Okay, so there's 4 groupings there. And in any business, it's really important to understand the numbers around each of these drivers of profit. Okay, so in terms of sales, this is the biggest area in terms of the numbers that you need to think about, and it's important to get your head around the sales leads that are generated. That's very important. So how many sales leads have you got? How are they coming through? And then you need to think about what's the conversion rate. So of those sales leads, how many do you convert? Yeah, because that's really important. That's important for your marketing. The next item in terms of sales is about keeping customers. Now this varies between different kinds of businesses, but it can also be returning customers. So if you're a business like an accountant's, then you want your customers to stay with you for a long time. If you are a product-based business, you want your customers to come back and buy more products. Yep. So retaining customers is very important. So what's your retention rate? How long do customers stay with you on average? Or how often do they return to you for different products and services? Okay, that's really important. It's also important in terms of understanding how much they spend and how often they spend with you. Okay, so for instance, what's your average sales value when you work out how much you've sold over the course of the year and how many people have bought from you? What's your average value? It's really important to understand that. And it's really important to think about how you can increase that. In what ways can you increase that? And same with how often they spend with returning customers. How often do they come back? Is there anything that you could do to encourage them to come back more often? Okay, so there are some key numbers there around your sales that have a strong impact on your profit. The blue areas are around your overheads and your cost of sales. So this is where we get into costs. And if your accountant has ever said to you, you need to keep an eye on your costs, they do it for a reason. Okay, and we'll look at that in terms of some samples, spreadsheets in a minute. So your overheads are everything not directly connected to the sales that you provide. Okay, so it could be things like office accommodation, it could be your utilities, it could be your insurance. Okay, so it's things that are needed to run the business but are not directly related to the sales. Then you've got your cost of sales. Yeah, so that's everything directly related to that item of service or product that you prepare. So it could be something like raw materials for products. In terms of a consultancy style business, it could be time, it could be employee costs. Okay, could be for e-commerce, it could be things like distribution and things like that, the cost of your e-commerce platform. Okay, things directly related to the sales. It's really important to keep an eye on your costs. Costs can have a big impact on the profit. Yeah. Systems and efficiency is a massive area, and we could spend a whole day just talking about systems and efficiency. But one of the things that you need to think about is waste in particular. So have you got your systems set up to minimize waste? Now, if your products and services, that's wastage in terms of items that can't go out to the customer, breakages and things like that. In terms of a consultancy-based business, that might be time wasted and things like that. Okay, because if you have waste in a business, that waste is costing you money and it impacts on the costs that we mentioned earlier. Okay, so it's important to think about that in terms of the driver of profit. Okay, and the last one on the list there is price. Okay, and we started off thinking about price. Price is a very, very important number, and we'll look at why in a minute. So you can see there that sales, there are a range of numbers there in relation to sales that are very important. And let's have a look at how that might work through in a business. Now, I'm going to show you a sample spreadsheet, and I make no apologies for this because this is really important. Okay. So let's have a look at the impact of a sales increase on a sample business, and I'll talk you through it as we go. So here we have a sample business, and we've got weekly numbers in here. So this business does their bookkeeping on a weekly basis, and for an average week, their sales income is £1,000. They are a manufacturing business, and their cost of sales are high. So their cost of sales are £700 a week, which leaves a gross profit of £300. They have overheads that work out around £200 a week, which leaves them with a net profit of £100. Okay, so that's effectively your mini profit and loss statement, your simple profit and loss statement shown there. So let's model the impact of a 10% sales increase. That sounds like a doable and potentially achievable sales increase. So let's see what happens. Okay, so there, a 10% increase in sales gives you £1,100 a week. Because you are producing more to make those sales, your cost of sales also goes up. Yep. and your overhead costs remain static in this instance because it's not a huge doubling or anything like that where your overheads have to increase. So your overheads remain the same. So what happens is your gross profit becomes £330 for the week and your net profit becomes £130. Great. Profit is up by 30%. Fantastic. Yep, everybody would love to see that on their bottom line. That's why we all chase sales. The focus is on sales. And that's great. Without sales, you wouldn't have a business. However, let's have a look at the impact of a cost decrease. So we looked at overheads and cost of sales. So let's see what happens when we're able to reduce the costs there. So there's the business again. And let's have a look and see what would happen if we were able to reduce the cost of sales by 5% and the overhead costs by 5%. Okay. So the sales income remains the same. The cost of sales reduce. That has a positive impact on the gross profit. Your overhead costs reduce, which has an even better impact on the net profit. So just by decreasing the costs of sales and the overhead costs by 5%, you can increase the profit by 45%. So by managing your costs, you can have a bigger impact in this instance than by increasing your sales. And for a lot of people, that's a bit of an eye-opener. The example that I'm using here is an example with a very high cost of sales. And we do that deliberately in order to demonstrate the magnitude of some of these changes. If you have a business with a lower proportion of cost of sales, then the magnitude won't be so high, but it will still make a difference. And I would recommend that you think about both your sales increases and your cost decreases and see what impact that can have on your bottom line. So the last spreadsheet I'm going to show you for a little while is related to the impact of a price increase. Okay, so same example for 1 week, and let's model a 10% increase in the price, which will go to the sales income. So the sales income increases by £100. But because we're not selling any more products and services, because we've put the price up for those that we're already selling, the cost of sales does not increase, which has a huge impact on the gross profit. Your overhead costs remain the same, and so your net profit is £200 for that week. So simply by increasing the price alone, the profit has doubled, okay? And that's why the price number is so important to your business and to your bottom line, okay? Price is the biggest driver of profit because there are no increase in costs of sales, no increase in overhead costs, and all the additional income goes to the bottom line of net profit, okay? And that's why getting your price right is so important, okay? And one of the observations that we've made in business over the last 25 years is that when businesses start out, they often set their prices to undercut the competition. And when they start out, their cost base is quite low. What happens when they start to grow is their costs start to increase. They make more sales, which is great, but the costs associated with that, particularly the overhead costs, can increase. And then they don't put their price up. So what happens is the margins are squeezed and business owners are working very, very hard, but don't seem to be making the profit that they always wanted. And very often it's because they've not analysed the numbers and they've not put their prices up, okay? And that's a really important thing to think about. So if you feel that you are working too hard for too little money, it could be because you started low price, low cost, which is often a place many people start, but you've not adjusted as you have grown. You may not have taken sufficient notice of your costs. You may not have put your prices up in line with those costs to keep your margins stable, okay? So please think about that. And whenever you feel that you're working too hard for too little money, then that's where you go to have a look, okay? And this is why we moved into providing price consultancy services for businesses, because it was one of these things that we began to realize was happening more and more, okay? So that's why price is the biggest driver of profit. So now I'm going to ask you another question. If you have your pen and paper handy, I would just like to ask you, what is your biggest fear or your biggest challenge when it comes to setting or changing your prices? So it can be challenge, it can be fear, it depends on individuals. But when you are setting your prices as a new start, or when you're looking to change your prices as a more established business, what is the biggest fear? What is the biggest challenge? And I'll just give you a minute to do that. Okie doke. If you've had a minute to think about that or to write it down, that's great. Because what we're going to do next is we're going to look at some of the pricing myths that support those fears or those challenges. And we're going to try and bust a few of them so that you can challenge in your own mind those fears that you are having. Okay. So there are three main myths when it comes to pricing. Okay. The first one is around price sensitivity. The second one is around the feeling that I must discount to get more customers or to win market share. And the third one is around, well, I sell a commodity and there's a going price for that. Okay. Now, the reality around these myths is there are some truths in all of them, but what happens is we let those small truths overtake what we're trying to do, and it can hamper us completely. So let's explore them and let's bust some of them, okay? So when it comes to price sensitivity, the fear can be that my customers are price sensitive, and if I charge too much, they won't buy, or if I put my prices up, they will leave, okay? That's why most people struggle to put their prices up. So let's have a think about this in terms of the case study. Let's explore that. So this is the same example with the same figures, okay? So let's see what happens with a 10% price increase that we explored earlier. It puts the net profit up to £200 per week in this instance. So let's look at what happens if we do lose customers. So say that we lost some customers, okay? The column on the far right shows us that in this business, in this example, they can afford to lose 9% of their sales and still have the same net profit that they had before, okay? A 9% drop in sales and still make just over £100 a week net profit, okay? And the reason for that is when you've put your price up, yeah, you don't have to make as many products and services in order to reach that positive net profit, okay? And in this instance, they could afford to lose 9% in sales. And think what you could do with that time. That would give you more time to go and find customers who are willing to pay those higher prices. It could give you more time to systemize your business and save some costs. It could give you more time to spend time with your family, if that's what you wanted, okay? So when it comes to price sensitivity, the research indicates that in any one market at any one time, some customers are price sensitive, and it's around 15% of any market at any one time, okay? And the question that I have for you is, do you want to provide for these customers? It's an absolutely valid business model to provide a low-cost strategy, a low-cost pricing strategy to reach those customers. And some companies do it very well. So you can think of some of the bigger, the low-cost airlines. You could think of the supermarkets like Aldi and Lidl. You could think of the furniture supplier like IKEA, okay? So the business model works, but my question is, do you want to provide for these customers? Because the business model has to be very particular. And if you do want to provide for them, I would advise you to go and think about and go and research low-cost pricing strategies, okay? Because there are a number of key factors that you have to have within your control in order to do this well and make a profit. okay? The reality is that the other 85% of the customers in any one market at any one time are value sensitive. And what they're looking for is they're looking for certain benefits, they're looking for a certain quality, they're looking for a certain value for their money, okay? And one of the tricks with this is to think about the comparison that we offered earlier, okay? And to think about making yourself hard to compare with those that are focused on the price sensitive. Because what you don't want is you don't want to be compared with somebody who's offering to that price sensitive market, okay? You want to reach those customers who are looking for value, and you need to think about the quality and the benefits that you bring. Okay, so which of your customers are price sensitive? Have you any? Are you lucky enough not to have any? If you are working in perhaps the high-end luxury market end, you probably don't have any customers who are price sensitive. You're probably working with those that want the best, okay? But I would encourage you to think about which of your customers may be price sensitive. You know, when you do put your prices up, do you get grumbles if you're in a sort of consultancy business or in a business where you have a client relationship? So give that a bit of thought, and if you don't know, think about how you can find out. Okay, there are ways that you can run customer surveys and find out by asking certain sorts of questions around this. Okay, so give that a bit of thought. But remember, only around 15% at any one time in any market are likely to be price sensitive. So the next myth is around I must gain discount. I must discount to gain market share. Okay. And the behavior around this is the only way I can get more customers is to be cheaper than my competitors. Okay? And this is the one that people often do when they first start out. So they'll look at the competitors in the marketplace, they'll think, well, they're established, they've been doing this for longer than me, they must be better than me, so I'll undercut them. Okay, so let's have a look. So if you do that and your prices are 5% cheaper, and let's see what happens with this. Okay, if we were to apply that discount across the board, we saw earlier the impact that it had, okay? When you put the prices up, and this is what happens when you put the prices down. So it impacts on your net profit significantly. So let's see what that means for the work that you do, okay? And the reality is that to keep a net profit of £100 a month, sorry, £100 a week in this instance, you would have to sell 20% more, okay? Just to keep at that same level. You would have to work 20% harder to keep that net profit, okay? And that's the example when people are working really, really hard. You know, that could be that's an extra day a week that you would have to work. So if you're working 6 days a week, you know, maybe you need to think about your pricing. Yep. And that's what happens when you try to undercut and you don't change things. Yep. And you don't keep an eye on your costs. Okay. So that's what can happen when you undercut and you apply a significant price discount across the board. And then the third myth is around, well, there's a market price for what I do. I sell a commodity, and what I do is totally interchangeable with what Joe Blogs up the road does, okay? And actually, I would challenge that. I would challenge that for every single small business owner, because your business is a reflection of you and your values and the way that you deliver. And that is never going to be the same as Joe Blogs up the road, okay? And let's explore that a bit more. So here we have a couple of lettuce. Now you would think that a lettuce was a commodity, but here we have 2 samples of lettuce that you can purchase in just happen to be Tesco's. Okay, so you've got an iceberg lettuce unwrapped, 43p. You've got an organic wrapped washed lettuce for £1.20. Okay, so a lettuce is a lettuce, but actually no, it's not, because the value of what's on offer with those 2 different items is quite different. So if I was going to buy an iceberg lettuce, it's not wrapped. I have to take care of it. I have to take it home and I have to chop it and wash it before we can eat it. Yeah. Whereas the organic wash lettuce is a lot easier to deal with. And you also get the benefit of it being organic. And a lot of people value that because they believe it's better for their health. So there's different value for different customers in those two offers. Okay. And Tesco's is offering a range for its customers so that they compare when they're in there and they don't go up the road to Marks and Spencer's to see if they've got different kinds of lettuce. So that goes back to the point that we made at the beginning. And if you still think that you're a commodity, think about oxygen. We breathe the air, we breathe oxygen without paying for it. But somebody's decided that there is a market for those who want an oxygen boost. Yeah, now granted, this is America, and it was $29 for this O2 dispenser to give you a boost. Okay, so you can even sell oxygen. So my challenge when it comes to the myth around a commodity is to think about how you stand out from the crowd. Okay, what do you do that is different from Joe Blogs up the road? And how do you do it that's different? Okay, so there's 2 questions for you, and I would ask you to write those down just now. What do you do that's different from others in your marketplace? And how do you do it that's different? So what do you bring in terms of expertise, in terms of quality, and in terms of customer service that would allow you to stand out from your competitors and charge differently? Yeah. Okie doke. So if you've got that, the key thing that allows you to charge differently is to think about what you could do to stand out more from the crowd. So if at the moment you maybe don't have too many things, think about what service you could bring or what additional products you could bring to stand out from the crowd and to offer, to allow customers to compare what you offer. Yeah. And then 2 things to think about, because those 2 things are very important in allowing you to charge higher prices. Okay. And I'm just going to spend the last 10 minutes going over the 6 C's of pricing. And we use this as a checklist when we're working with clients to make sure that they've covered all the bases when it comes to setting their prices. Okay, we have a range of tools that we work through for each of these, but if you can remember these 6 C's, it will put you in a very good place for charging higher prices. Okay, so the first one is know your costs, and we looked at the costs when we looked at the 9 drivers of profit. So your overhead costs and your cost of sales. Okay, and know your margins. So what are your gross profit margins? Yeah. And if you've several products and services, then I'm sorry, but you have to sit down and you have to look at that for each of your products and services. Yeah. And once you have worked out how much it costs to provide each of those products and services, and you've added a margin, then that becomes your floor price. Okay. And that's the price below which you do not go. Okay. You do not go below, you do not discount that, because if you discount that, you're cutting into those basic margins. Okay. And that's where you start to work for less and less money. So look at your costs, keep an eye on your costs, review your costs regularly, and apply a margin. You may have industry rates for margins, and that's always worth looking at as a starting point, but that's only a starting point. The second C of pricing is know your customers, and it's your customers. Be clear about who you are looking to reach, why you are looking to reach them, that there is a demand there, and categorize your different customer groupings. Okay, so you may have some who are price sensitive. Okay, so my question to you is, if you do have some that are price sensitive, would you offer them your all singing, all dancing version of your product or service at a low price? I would argue, no, you wouldn't, okay? But there may be something that you can offer an entry level or at a price sensitive level for those customers. What about the other end? What about the equivalent 15 to 20% who like the best? So what are you offering those customers? And then what's your standard offering in the middle? There's a way of thinking about it. So be clear about your customers and be clear about the categories of customers that you have in terms of their willingness to spend. The third C is confidence in your value. And this can be a really, really tricky one. And our advice is to find an accountability partner, find a trusted friend, somebody who isn't connected directly to the business, that you can work with to spend time on defining your value. And you can also engage your customers in this by asking for feedback. Yeah, what they value about you, what they've enjoyed about working with you, what they liked about the products or the service or the delivery or the customer service wrap or anything around that, what the feedback is around that. Spend time finding out about that and work with somebody who can challenge your perspective. One of the classics when you have your own business is that you can sometimes undervalue what you do simply because you can do it, okay? However, you do it because that's your strength. There are other people that have different strengths that can do other things, but they value what you do because they can't do it, okay? So just because you can do it doesn't mean it's not very valuable. Quite the opposite. And spend some time with somebody else teasing out what it is that you bring to the marketplace that's valuable to others, okay? And that can take a bit of time. It's a process that you can go back and forward to, but it's really, really important. And if you do it with somebody else, and if you spend some time asking your customers, that builds the confidence in what you offer, okay? The fourth C is around choice of offering. And I mentioned this at the beginning in relation to the exercises that we have done, and also in relation to customers. So how could you offer choice to your customers? And an example would be the supermarkets. They're expert at this with their various ranges, okay? So they often have what they call their value ranges for the price sensitive element of the customer grouping. Then they would have their standard range, and they might have several branded ranges within that. And then they might have their luxury end and branded ranges that are associated with the luxury end. So they offer a whole range for different customer groupings. So thinking about that, what could you do to offer choice to your customers? So if you're in retail or if you're in e-commerce, do you have a range of offerings at different price points? If you are a more consultancy or professional services kind of business, do you have different levels of service to suit different customers? Okay, that's a way of thinking about it. So what choice do you offer? The fifth C is around context and the context of the purchase. And there's a lot of research on this in terms of the context can have a really important impact on the price that somebody's willing to pay. So a classic example is a plumber. If I've got a leaky tap and it's a bit annoying and I want the plumber to come out, then fair enough, I'll pay the standard rate. But if the tap has burst and there's water all over the kitchen floor, then I'm going to pay a bit more because I want the plumber to come out now. Okay, and I'll pay a call out charge because I want it fixed. Now, I'm not advocating highway robbery, and I'm not advocating charging outrageous prices with respect to context, but it pays to give a little bit of thought to when a customer might be willing and when it's fair to ask a little more. So if I'd called the plumber at 10:30 at night, then it's absolutely fair that if he's going to come out and fix that because there's water all over the kitchen floor, that he charges me a little extra because of the inconvenience. Okay. There's another example when it comes to the research in that very often people are prepared to pay more when they're buying a gift for somebody else rather than buying it for themselves. And that's something to think about, which explains why the wedding industry is often very well priced, because it's often mum and dad that are paying for a lot of that, okay? And they want the best for their sons and daughters. So think about the context of what you do. Think about the context, perhaps if it's about delivery. Amazon do this beautifully when it comes to different delivery prices, different shipping costs for how soon you get things. There's another example, okay? So please think about the context and where it's fair and reasonable to increase the price. And lastly, competitors. And we do this lastly for a reason. When you've looked at all the other C's above, okay, only then should you go and have a look at your competitors. Because if you don't do all the work above, then you'll just go and look at the competitors and you'll look at their price and you might just blindly undercut. And you might not be providing the same quality of goods or service. You might not be, you might not have the same expertise, or you might have more expertise. You might have different service levels to a competitor. So it's really important to work on your business first before you look at your competitors. And only then is it reasonable to see, well, what do they charge? But how does that compare with the service as well as the price? And then you're not simply undercutting them and trying to offer the same quality of service for a lesser price, okay? So that's a quick overview of the 6 C's of pricing, and we recommend that you take your time to go through each of those and work on each element in turn, and then where you are clear that there's added value, or where there's more choice, or where there's a particular context, that you add to that floor price that you first encountered or you first worked out, okay? And that means that you will raise the average price for your products and services across the board, and that will have a positive impact on your bottom line. Okie doke. So that's, bear with me a minute. That's a quick run through, a quick overview of some of the really important numbers that you need to focus on in your business. And that also explains why you need to do it and the key things that you need to look at. So I hope that's been useful, and I'd be happy to take any questions if you have them just now, or if anybody wants to contact me to ask for more information around any of this, I'd be delighted to help.
Susanne, that was great. I really enjoyed that today, because even though you're in a business, sometimes it's good just to take the time out again to reevaluate where your business is actually at, and things that you just take for granted and you just carry on in the business. But sometimes you do have to go back and go through all those pointers again. So when was the last time you increased your prices? And then I think for a lot of people, they're probably panicking about increasing their prices just now, especially coming out of a pandemic. Will people be still in business? Can they afford to? Will their customers be able to afford the prices? So it's all very relevant, the topic that you were discussing today.
And Brexit's had an impact on a lot of businesses as well with their costs. It's increased a lot of costs for a lot of businesses. And that double whammy about not knowing whether their market's going to still be there, but they've got all these additional costs, is a real stretch and a real challenge. But if you're on top of them, and if you're thinking about your customers, you know, there's a lot of customers desperate to return to the marketplace. You know, they've not been able to spend their money. So, you know, yes, there've been some people who have struggled and lost their jobs, and so the price sensitive group will be there. But equally, there's a lot of people that sat on a lot of money and want to get out and about and want to spend. So it really pays to think about your market and where you're at with that kind of grouping.
And it's so significant when you put it in front of you in black and white, when you see the difference just 10% makes. Yeah. And it's not a huge increase, but it just makes to the bottom line a big difference. Yeah,
and it's really important to try and model that for your own business, because every business is different. Everybody's got different costs of sales, different proportions. So it's really important just to do, even back of fag packet, you know, you get your even last year's accounts, even just using your last year's accounts, asking your accountant to tease out the key numbers for you and saying to them, look, what would happen if I put my prices up by 2%? And you just do that calculation. Your accountant will be able to do that. Martin can do that kind of thing in his head, you know, so your accountant will be able to do that. Ask them the question, you know, if you've got a bookkeeper, ask them the question. If you don't want to do the numbers yourself, that's what you pay them for.
Yeah, exactly. As you said earlier, it's also about building your strengths and your teams, and some people just aren't good with numbers,
Yeah.
and some people the creative side of their brain. So yes, definitely having a good bookkeeper and a good accountant that can actually be a business advisor as well is definitely worth spending the money, and you can build the relationship with them as well.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for today. To say, normally we would have this as a proper session, but because of the timing with Easter, I think a lot of people just decided to take an extended break. But we will be coming back with a follow-up, the next session with you at the end of April. Can you just give us a wee insight of the next session as well, what people can actually be booking into and what they can look forward to?
Well, we've got a choice. We could go into more detail with the numbers for those that want to build their strength around the numbers. Or we could explore the 6 C's of pricing a bit more, and we could just take each one and we could have like a question and answer session, and we could explore, you know, we could explore people doing the work around their costs. We could explore people doing some work around customers with some key questions. So it's entirely up to you really, in terms of we could focus on the numbers and we could do a kind of masterclass on your profit and loss, and we could go through each of those, or we could focus on the 6 C's of pricing and have a kind of questions and answers.
Yeah, well, what we'll do is we'll put it out to the group and we'll see what the highest percentage comes back with, what they actually think would be more relevant to where they're actually at in their business just now. And obviously things are opening up again. As I say, delighted. It's been so good. It's been really good for me just to sit and take an hour out of my life as well, just to go through that and just refresh yourself as well. It's really interesting, just the difference, as I say, it all makes. Yep. Susanne, look forward to seeing you next week. Delighted. That was really good to see. Good refresher course. And
you enjoyed it.
Great.